Good morning. So you may have entirely forgotten about the Great Divorce. It was quite a while ago that we began. And this was intended to be kind of the last follow-up to our Great Divorce discussion. And it provides some kind of counters to Lewis's narrative, maybe. Or maybe I'm just finding some complimentary voices. But you might be saying, okay, Lewis, basically an Episcopalian, Church of England, light touch, maybe a little wishy-washy. What if this is just kind of made-up hopefulness and not actually the essence of the Christian tradition? So, is the Great Divorce Anglican wishful thinking? Could more conservative traditions have it right? What if there's a place called heaven and a place called hell, and God simply decides to send you to one place or the other? Either if you are from one tradition based on your merit, or from another tradition just because he has to damn some people to show his glory. Well, I thought we would ask a more conservative voice this question. And I was thinking about who to ask, and I thought maybe this guy. This is Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, aka Benedict XVI, probably the most influential Roman Catholic theologian of the 20th century, responsible for a lot of the kind of more conservative retrenchment of the Roman Catholic Church in the years after Vatican II. Interestingly, also largely responsible for the Second Vatican Council. He's one of the great theologians behind Vatican II, but various acts of Marxism, including the Baader-Meinhof movement, sort of convince him that a more conservative response is called for by the church because of the social changes happening. What does he have to say about heaven and hell? What should we hold on to here? First, the fact of God's unconditional respect for the freedom of his creatures. What can be given to a creature, however, is love. And with this, all its neediness can be transformed. Heaven reposes upon freedom. So for Ratzinger, there was still this idea that the only real problem in terms of heaven for human beings is the exercise of our freedom. Not our freedom to jump in and be perfect beings who somehow earn going to heaven, but just the freedom to accept God's love. So Ratzinger is very much on the same page with Lewis that hell is a door locked from the inside only, that God is not placing people into hell, that instead it is just a rejection of the love of God that is the experience of hell. For the saints, hell is not so much a threat to be hurled at other people, but a challenge to oneself. What do you think of that? So the Desert Fathers and Mothers would say that to contemplate the idea of eternal separation from the goodness and love of God for yourself can be a spiritually fruitful thing. I want to be a good employee and go along with my boss and help embezzle this money, but maybe there's a bigger thing going on here. Maybe it's not just pleasing my boss. Maybe there's something about pleasing God that I should be thinking about. So the Desert Fathers and Mothers would say, contemplation of hell for yourself, spiritually fruitful. Contemplation of hell about anybody else, immediately falling into sin. So if you say, well, Hitler was terrible, but at least he's burning in hell, that's sinful. That is horrific. Even Augustine, who is not Mr. Sugar-Coated Sunshine, says, if you are a Christian, you have a moral obligation to pray that hell has a sign outside that says, welcome to hell, population 0. That no one actually ends up separated from God. The New Testament is aware in full continuity of the faith of the Judaism of its day, that in between the first Easter and our own resurrection, human beings do not sink into nothingness. The description of this intermediate state, which hitherto was carried out with the help of such terms as paradise, Abraham's bosom, lying under the altar, the dwelling place of refreshment, is now strikingly integrated into a Christological context. The person who dies is with the Lord. Whoever is with the Lord does not die. So, He is very much echoing Lewis, this idea that there is this period of separation between body and soul before the day of the resurrection, and that for those who are in faith, those who are open to love, they are with the Lord in paradise, in this place of refreshment, to use Lewis's own term, and to be in this place is to be with Christ. 2 points are clear. A, humans live on with the Lord even before the resurrection. So in this life, you can be in heaven, living with the Lord. B, this living on is not yet identical, and also after death. B, this living on is not yet identical with the resurrection, which comes only at the end of days, and will be the full breaking in of God's lordship over the world. So the coming of the world to come, from Olam Haba in Hebrew, this biblical conception of this period of separation of body and soul, the bringing back together of body and soul, and entering into the world to come. There are a lot more quotes from Ratzinger. You kind of get where I'm going. Not a big conflict here. His book, Eschatology, is awesome. It's totally worth a read. It's pretty dense theology, but it is spectacular. He's really a great theologian. I did spend a lot of time picking out these quotes, but I'm going to skip ahead. What about science and philosophy? So there's a super interesting book written by, does anybody know the philosopher Karl Popper? So Popper, if you know much about Popper, you will know not a big Christian, not a person of faith. He comes out of logical positivism. So he comes out of this world in which a specific group of philosophers are saying basically like, if something is not scientifically observable, it de facto cannot exist. So if you can't see it through a microscope or a telescope or with the unaided eye, it's not a thing. It's not real. And to even ask questions about what's beyond that, that's not even asking questions. That's just being kind of crazy. Because there is nothing except atoms. That's all that exists. So Popper comes out of this tradition, but he wants to say, I don't think that's actually scientifically defendable. Like, how do you defend this idea that only that which is scientifically verifiable exists when you're making the statement which is not scientifically verifiable? Like when you ask him, can you prove that nothing exists beyond what you can see through a microscope or telescope? They would say, well, no, I can't prove it. It's just obvious. And you're like, well, so your whole system of nothing which isn't scientifically verifiable rests on this assertion which is not scientifically verifiable? That is a very indefensible philosophical stance. So Karl Popper is kind of coming from this perspective, but he wants to say, hang on, that's a bridge too far. We can't say there is absolutely nothing but that which is material, but I'm also not prepared to go so far as to say there is something which is not material initially. And then he sort of gets deeper into thinking about these questions, and he says, actually, I don't know about God or religion or anything like that, but I would say, actually, there are things which are extant, which are non-material. So he divides things into these 3 worlds, he calls them. So there's world 1, which is stuff you can see through a microscope or telescope, stuff that just like is physical, is tangible, exists in the world, processes you can like experiment on and repeat the experiments and prove that they're the case. Does that make sense? He says there's world 2, which is your mind. So all of us have, gray matter and blood sugar and neurotransmitters and all that stuff. But if you put all that stuff through, like an fMRI or whatever, you don't actually see a mind. You don't like think of a dog and you see a picture of a dog in somebody's head. There is this thing, the mind, that means a lot more than what we say when we talk about the brain. So he says there's world 2 that's the mind, and then there's world 3, which are things produced by various minds that go on evolving and influencing even after the specific mind that came up with them are gone. So Karl Popper is no longer with us, and yet I'm talking about his ideas today. He came up with these things out of this immaterial mind, And they are things that not only are sort of in our minds, that we think about and talk about, they actually influence our society, the way we do things, the way we shape one another as human beings. Like they influence so much. So that's what he calls World 1, 2, and 3. So for Popper, so that's Popper, Eccles, John Eccles, Sir John Eccles, is a Nobel Prize winning neuroscientist, neurophysiologist. And so they write this book together on the self and its brain. It's super interesting. There's a lot of sciencey stuff that is way above my pay grade, but it's really written more for a general audience than an audience of scientists or just philosophers. So their idea is the self possesses the brain as its physiological substrate and uses it as an instrument. Interesting. Citing split brain research, this guy Sperry, and hemispheric lesion studies and direct simulation experiments, another guy Penfield, the self-conscious mind is an independent entity that's actively engaging in reading out from the multitude of active centers in the modules of the liaison areas of the dominant cerebral hemisphere, which obviously all of us knew already. The mind isn't generated by the brain, but interacts with it, scanning and probing it. So he thinks about the mind as this kind of, he's resorting to a physicalist metaphor here still, but this kind of complex analysis machine that's taking all the brain stimuli and it's sorting it and it is focusing on specific things, it is putting things together. So he talks about like all the data that comes into our eyes or our optic nerve or whatever. It's really disparate data. And there's no place that it's actually like reconciled. There's not like a part of the brain where it's like putting together color and shape and form and you get this like product that pops out that looks like a dog. Instead, the mind is kind of taking in all of this and thinking about an image. Interesting. When all cerebral activity ceases at death, the self-conscious mind that has had the autonomous existence, in a sense, in World 2, so thoughts, feelings, experiences, now finds that the brain it has scanned and probed and controlled so efficiently and effectively through a long life is no longer giving any messages at all. What happens then is the ultimate question. So for an agnostic/atheist, hardcore analytic philosopher, and a Nobel Prize winning neuroscientist, they're like, who knows? You know? But they certainly don't say the brain is a bunch of chemical interactions that produce the mind as a form of chemistry, and when those chemical interactions stop, the mind stops, the self stops, the soul stops. They're like, no. The self, the soul, the mind, this is something beyond just chemical interactions of, sort of, you push one domino down and a bunch of other dominoes fall. That without the brain, the mind doesn't do what it does. So if you cut off a part of a brain, if you have an iron spike through a brain, your mental processes change. But that doesn't mean that the brain and the mind are synonymous. You know, if my blood sugar levels drop dramatically, my speech becomes largely incoherent. I would be like, so there's this book about a thing in your head, and people think with it sometimes, but maybe not other times. Because if I'm low blood sugary, I just can't function at all. It doesn't mean that I am just sugar. You know, if you have like me next to like a sack of cane sugar, you're like, same thing, you know, producing the same results. That I'm totally dependent on sugar, but I'm not just sugar. The sugar is not the whole of the process which produces my speech. Bad analogy. Low power. That's another sort of analogy. So he also says, the odds against a particular self arising purely from its genetic code are roughly 10 to the power of 10,000 to 1 against. This is a number that's so big, there is nothing in the physical universe that is a reasonable analog. This is so much more than we can conceive of. I am constrained to believe that there is what we might call a supernatural origin of my unique self-conscious mind or my unique selfhood or soul. longer, yeah, that quote. So this is, what do you all make of that? There are scientists in the room, there are people who think deeply about these things in the room, there are philosophers in the room. What do you make of all of that?
I'm frightened that it takes us back to Hamlet's soliloquy.
To Hamlet's soliloquy?
Hamlet's soliloquy.
Yeah. Interesting.
I find it frightening.
Please. Father, did you have?
Back up a bit, I spent a semester with Karl Popper.
Wow.
I was in graduate school. And at that time, he was moving away from the knowledge of scientific discovery into a more evolutionary perspective. And it was quite an interesting experience to spend a semester with him. We became pretty good friends. And called me up late one night, asked if I would come to class the next day, maybe a signed autograph or some of his works. He was a lovely man.
Amazing. That is incredible. And his evolutionary work comes up actually a lot in this book. Like, one of his primary arguments, oh, thank you, Ray, that's so thoughtful. One of his primary arguments against the mind being nothing but a set of physical processes is there's no, if the mind and the kind of physical processes are identical, there's no evolutionary reason for the mind to have evolved. Like, if the physical processes get you sort of from point A to point B and increase your fitness and let you get enough coconuts to survive or whatever, why would we get this illusory thing called the mind if it doesn't actually buy us anything? He's like, that makes no evolutionary sense. Really interesting. Please.
So I'm kind of stuck on Popper as the person who introduced the notion that we can't actually prove anything, we can only falsify things. We can also only prove that something's not true.
Yeah.
So, swans are all white. Oh wait, there's a black swan, so that disproves that statement, right? And then I was trying to think about, well, how does that apply to faith?
Yeah.
Right? I don't know the answer here.
So I think that Popper's sort of component of falsifiability is kind of thinking through scientific questions. So Wittgenstein concludes the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus with this section basically saying, like, so there are these other things that we can't talk about scientifically. There's like, love and ethics and beauty and stuff like that. And these are the questions on which kind of science has to remain silent. And I think that Popper is really, I think he really wants to address sort of like the Vienna Circle and this like hard positivism, which says like, well, so if I take a kind of Wittgensteinian example, you can say a claim like the world is 10 billion years old is falsifiable. So if I come to you today and I say the world is 10 billion years old, and then, Mary stands up and she says, what are you talking about? The world's more like 14 billion years old. You're like 4 billion years off, buddy. We know this by background radiation, carbon, all this stuff. I would say, oh gosh, thanks very much for the correction. I appreciate it. I was 4 billion years off. Falsifiable claim. If I come up and I say, the world is less than 8 years old, you'd all be like, what are you talking about? Less than 8 years old? Like, how did you come to that conclusion? And I would just say, like, well, it is. Like, look around. Like, the world is less than 8 years old. That's got to be the case. There's no way to falsify that claim, because I'm clearly not arguing from just a piece of data that I have access to that I'm going to present to you. And so, like the only way to think about the world is more than 8 years old is, like, if I'm right, less than 8 years old. If I'm right, the world is less than 8 years old. Then, if I can prove that to you, you have to question every thought you've ever had over the course of your entire life, right? Like, the vast majority of our lives were lived more than 8 years ago, so like you've been wrong on every assumption you've ever made about everything. That would be like a conversion, like turning your whole world on its head. So it's not just kind of like one simple fact replacing another fact. That's like everything gets topsy-turvy. So I think that Popper is trying to sort of delineate a claim like the world is 10 billion years old, which you actually can falsify, from a claim like the world is less than 8 years old or more than 8 years old, which is not falsifiable because it's actually ultimately a metaphysical claim, even though to us, in its sort of like in at first glance, it feels like a scientific claim. Does that make sense? So, moving on. Funeral or burial? The Book of Common Prayer only says burial. Oh, sorry. Did you have that?
No.
Okay. Oh, please, Neil.
Yeah, so
Another scientist. Tell us.
Exactly. So I think from the evolutionary perspective, you have to think about it from a couple of lenses. As you said, disprove that it's not greater than 8 years old.
Yeah.
Same thing with 10 billion years old, or 10 billion, what did you say?
Yeah, I think it's at 10 billion versus 14 billion. Yeah.
Prove it more.
Yeah.
It's not more than or less than.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to think about the unit of time at that point in history. So the way we interpret a day, the first day God created the heavens and the earth, etc. That unit of time, but they way back then, would be much larger, right? And so, and over time, that definition changes what a day is.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have, the idea of sundials and, the expression of how we made Gregorian calendar.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. That's a really helpful nuance. I love that. Getting into stuff that is. Oh, sorry, Susan. Did you have a? So I feel like I've been speaking totally above my pay grade. There's this phenomenon of epistemic creep in which you say like, I'm a great cardiologist, so I'll fly the plane today. Dangerous territory for a theologian to talk about brain science. Let me get back in the Book of Common Prayer, which I know and love. So the Book of Common Prayer never uses the term funeral. We use funeral all the time, and there's nothing wrong with saying funeral, but the prayer book always says burial. And it's kind of interesting to think about why. So funes in Latin probably, not definitely, but probably comes from funalia, which are these torches that were carried before a body in a Roman funeral procession. So a funeral, in its kind of most direct meaning, is really talking about pagan, Roman, civic death ceremony, the sort of death rituals of the Roman Empire. And the Book of Common Prayer very explicitly doesn't use that language. It uses this word burial. Biergen in Old English, which obviously I have no idea how to pronounce, is rooted in this Proto-Germanic word, which means to hide or to protect. So it's not this Roman parting of the sort of Hamlet style sloughing off a mortal coil. It's not getting rid of this pointless body which you don't need anymore so that your spirit can go, commune with Poseidon or whatever. Instead, it's this idea of hiding and protecting the body until the day of resurrection. Does anybody know the Emily Dickinson poem, Safe in Their Alabaster Chambers? George, I'm looking at you. Can anyone recite the Emily Dickinson poem? I can't. Look it up. It's this idea of like the brave citizens, I think, of the resurrection who are like waiting in their tombs for the resurrection day. This is kind of the guiding understanding of the Book of Common Prayer's kind of idea around what we're doing in what we call a funeral or a burial. So it's this idea of in part kind of giving the person over to the care of God for this time between now and the day in which God's glory is going to cover the face of the earth like water covers the face of the sea. Here we have, this is from the 1550 noted Book of Common Prayer, so the kind of musical version of the Book of Common Prayer for 1550. This is an illustration from Elizabeth I's funeral procession. You have the sergeant of the vestry, aka the verger, too thick. You have the children's choir. And then you have the gentlemen of the chapel, the 29 sacred ministers who accompanied Queen Elizabeth I's coffin. So, there's some questions in planning your funeral. So I mentioned in the service, if you don't plan the funeral yourself, your hymns are going to be Amazing Grace and Ave Maria. If you want them to be Amazing Grace and Ave Maria, great choices, classics. But if you don't, plan it yourself. You know, if you just really don't care and you're like, whatever, you know, my kids or my neighbor or my dog or somebody can like just figure it out, we're happy to. But it's actually a great gift to your family to do this ahead of time and have it stored at the church or attached to your will or whatever, in some way that your family and eventually the church is going to get this and can carry this out. So we did a wonderful funeral yesterday for the amazing John Nickham, and a woman came up to me afterward and she said, "This is the most beautiful service I have ever been to. I am at an age in which I go to a lot of funerals. I have never been to one this beautiful. You must have taken so much time designing this." And I said, "I didn't do anything. It was all John Nickham. He had a detailed funeral plan and he executed it. And it was fantastic." So plan your dang funeral, people. I have some forms for you to take home after this, but we're going to kind of walk through the questions. They're like, the gift and the curse of being an Episcopalian is it's all in the prayer book already. So it's not a lot of, you know, if you were like from some religious traditions, you'd be like, okay, well, I think I want like a parachute draped over things, and I'm gonna have like a Van Halen solo, and then we're gonna go into like, we're all gonna high five each other, and then we're gonna have chocolate cake. You don't have to think about any of that. It's fantastic. So, well, the big choice, right one or right two? The great episcopal choice that we're always faced with. Two roads diverge. So, it's the same service in Elizabethan or modern English. Take your pick. Would you like to begin the service with one or more remembrances from family or friends? So eulogies. So you can just say yes. You can say, I want my neighbor Dave, unless, you know, he predeceases me, in which case I want like my friend Edith, and like you can list who you would like to speak. We do these at the beginning of the service because technically they are not part of the service. The prayer book makes an allowance for either one eulogy or a sermon. So if you want to do that, you can, but the recommendation is if you want to have a couple people speak, we do it at the very beginning, after we walk in, after the procession in, and then we really begin the service with the opening collect. So would you like people to speak, and who? I want to emphasize, these are not egotistical questions to say yes to. Like, you're going to be dead. You're really not going to care how people felt about you because you're going to be in the resplendent glory and love of God. You're going to know that you're infinitely loved by the maker of heaven and earth. And so, like, how your former boss felt about you, largely irrelevant. So, this is not about, like, celebration of me. This is, like, who would be a good sort of person to talk to people who are going through grief after I'm gone? It's not an egotistical question. Is there a specific member of the St. Albans clergy whom you would like to preach? There is zero ego bound up with this. If you're just like, you know, I don't know, Mark has a good vibe. I'm gonna pick Mark. Pick Mark, that's awesome. Nobody is offended, it's all good. Will the service be a burial, a casket or ashes present, or a memorial, no casket or ashes present? So if you were sort of contemplating being lost at sea, being dismembered on the battlefield, I would pick memorial. Otherwise, burial. Easy choice. But if your family is making this decision and they're not church people, they might be like, I mean, if it's like a burial, we're gonna have to like go by the funeral home first and get the ashes, and I mean that's an extra 20 minutes, you know, that's too much trouble. Make your choice yourself. It's really important. Burial is a big deal because we believe that the person is the image and likeness of God, that bodies are sacred representations of God. Have your body or your ashes present at your funeral. Make it a real burial. Don't just do a memorial. My wise words. If a burial, will there be an interment in a columbarium or in a cemetery following the service? Scattering the ashes or keeping them in a box in somebody's sock drawer, that's not the move. Definitely be interred somewhere. A cemetery is a great place to be interred. A columbarium is a great place to be interred. If you're like, I've been worshiping at St. Albans for 40 years, but you know what? I was baptized at this little parish in Massachusetts and they have a beautiful columbarium. That's great. You know, like, nobody cares in terms of, there are no hurt feelings, there's no allegiance one has to abide by. Pick a spot. Because if not, your kids are going to be like, well, she talked about this trip to Las Vegas once, so maybe we could like sprinkle it on the slot machine and like, you know, don't let that happen. It's not a good thing. We believe in the resurrection of the body, so you want to be safe in your alabaster chamber somewhere waiting for the day of resurrection. If your children do scatter you on a slot machine, if you are lost at sea, if you die in battle or whatever, are you still a member of the resurrection? Of course! But this is a way that we sort of honor that reality by like living into it rather than just saying like, oh, whatever, God's going to take care of it, I don't really care. 6, would you prefer this to be a Eucharist or would you prefer not to include Holy Communion? Eucharist is definitely preferable. Like the sacrament of the body and blood of Christ, this is like at the heart of our life of a worshiping community. Why would you not do a Eucharist? Let's say you're like, I am the only one in my family to go to church. Everybody else is like totally non-religious. They're going to be offended that there's this thing happening that they feel like they shouldn't do, but then maybe they sort of feel like maybe they should do, but they don't want to do. You know, my family's all Jewish, and like they are going to feel excluded. Reasonable considerations. But I would say if you're just looking for a default, I would have the Eucharist. Again, it's not my funeral, so, you know, do what you want. Would you like our organist to play the service? Do you have requests for vocal or instrumental soloists? Okay, this is the big one. If you don't have a choir, if you don't have Matthew recruit a few soloists, and you don't come from a churchy family or friend group, the hymns are going to be like, like nobody's going to know what's going on, they're not going to be able to sing it, it's going to be very confusing. If you have a bunch of soloists, it just rolls. You know, people are like, they take the lead and people jump in and follow, so big deal. Are there specific types of flowers to include in the arrangements? Would you like additional flower arrangements for reception? Again, no wrong answers. Like, I'm a Texan, yellow roses, blue bot, not really, I don't really care. But do whatever, it's all good. But if you don't, our flower guild are just gonna be like, oh, we don't know what she would have liked, you know? It would be so nice to honor her in a specific way. Just put down something. It's a favor to us. Please choose one reading from each of the following following categories, 4 passages in total. So these are the Book of Common Prayer's suggested readings. If you have something that's not on the list that's from the Bible, that is great. You just have to check in with me or a member of the clergy about this, preferably me, just so if there's something, you know, you're like, oh, I love this passage, Psalm 139, by the waters of Babylon, we sat down, we wept when we remembered Zion. It's one of my favorite reggae songs. It's a beautiful song. Then I can be like, it's great. You know, it ends with the thing about bashing the heads of babies against the rocks. So, you know, I could talk about that in my sermon and give the actual spiritual meaning of that, which is profound and powerful, or we could like curtail that, but let's have a conversation. So you don't have to pick these passages, you do have to get approval for a different passage. If you want something that's not biblical, that is great for the reception, or that's great to have one of your family members read as part of a eulogy, or a friend read as part of a eulogy. There's no prohibition against a poem in the eulogy, a family history, whatever. But if you want, like, you know, lyrics to "I Did It My Way" to be like one of the biblical readings, ain't gonna happen. I'm just gonna pick something else. I'm just gonna cross that out of my funeral plan. So don't think about it. So it's Old Testament, Psalm, a passage from the Epistles of Revelation, and a gospel. What does that sound like? Sunday morning. Just regular church. If Eucharist, please choose 4 hymns from the 82 hymnal also, or lift every voice and sing. If a non-Eucharistic service, please choose 2 hymns from the 82 hymnal, or lift every voice and sing. The following hymns are frequently chosen for burials, but any hymn from either the Episcopal Church's 1902 hymnal or lift every voice and sing is welcome. If you'd like to include a piece of sacred music not found in the hymnal, a soloist or instrumentalist is welcome to perform it at the offertory anthem. Non-sacred music, be it Mozart or Aretha Franklin, is most welcome at the reception. So there is nothing wrong with, having a deep passion for Metallica or whatever, but the space is consecrated to worship. So in the way that, I wouldn't take the chalice from the altar and, go over to the coffee machine and fill it with coffee and just, drink coffee out of the chalice while I'm doing the forum. The space is just consecrated for the worship of God. So everything we do in the space is totally oriented towards God. We're, staring at the presence of God in the space all the time. So again, if you want Aretha Franklin, that's awesome. Aretha Franklin is one of the greatest artists of all time as far as I'm concerned, but do it in the reception. And you can even give instructions I want my family to be be quiet everyone, we're gonna play Your Love Is Like a Seesaw now. And then everyone's quiet, they listen to the song, and then you go on with the party. Would you like to follow the service with reception in either Nurse Hall or Trin Bath Assembly? If so, will this be catered? Some of these, if you're man, I don't know, it's a long way away, I don't know, maybe everybody's gonna be Aeritarian by that point. I'm gonna leave that up to my heirs. You can just leave stuff blank, that's completely fine. Would you like the services to be live streamed? Same question, is Aunt Kathy gonna really have moved back from Norway by then, or is she still gonna be in Norway? Leave it blank if you want. Are there other special requests that you would like to discuss with our rector? Let's chat. I'm always up for talking about these things. But again, if it's not oriented towards God, it's for the parish hall. If it is oriented towards God, let's do it. If you want to have Kanye West, Jesus Walks, fantastic. That's awesome. Literally any other Kanye West, completely banned. Especially this late period neoconservative stuff. But for the parish hall, most welcome. That is stuff about planning your funeral at St. Albans, and Mary has the guide for you. Ta-da! So if you want to fill one of these out, you can do so. It's got name and date, and you can just give it to us here at the church, and we will file it. If you want to answer these questions in an email, you could send them to office@stalbanstc.org or whatever. There are various ways of getting us the info. You can also just paperclip this to the copy of your will in the bank vault, and your heirs are going to find it and be oh, I guess this is what she wants. So whatever is fine. Having it on file at the church is the easiest way to make sure we actually have it. Does that make sense? So plan your funeral. Don't neglect it. Thank you all. See you in church. That's great. The self and it's great.